Well, hello again, everyone, and welcome to the latest in our series of webcasts as part of our Roadmap to Recovery series here at Travel Weekly. And I'm delighted today to be joined by Kelly Cooks, who's from the Advantage Travel Partnership, by Derek Jones, who is from Dare Touristique, which of course owns Kuoni, and by Paul Charles, who is the Chief Executive of the PC agency, but also the coordinator of the Quash Quarantine campaign. And I've brought them all together because we have literally just heard the news from the government. They finally published this list of safe destinations that Brits can travel to. It's a list we've been waiting for some time. We expected it on Monday, then I think we heard Wednesday, then maybe Thursday, it's now Friday, but it's finally come through. So maybe let's come to you, Paul, because you've been desperately trying to get this quarantine overturned. I mean, it's good news, isn't it? But it's been a long time coming.
Oh, it's great news that the government's finally seen some sense and actually listened to what the industry's been saying for over 6 weeks now. It's been 6 weeks non-stop, hasn't it? And yeah, it's terrific that they're removing the blanket quarantine measures from Friday the 10th. It's really good news for the industry that there's a bit of certainty. Not 100%, and we'll come to that soon, but it's good there's a bit of certainty over the countries that you can try to go to from tomorrow when the FCO advice will change. But of course, there are many countries on the list that have their own restrictions. So even if you want to go, you won't be able to get in unless you're prepared to quarantine. So the danger is some of this is pretty confusing for consumers. And it's going to take a few days for it to unravel, I think, in terms of how easy this is to understand. For us, watching it every day, it's something we're still getting our heads around, but for most consumers, they won't have a clue. So this has been a very complicated journey for all of us in the industry to get to this stage.
Yes, and I mean, confusion is a good word to use, I think, here, because we've had different iterations of this as well, because we've had air bridges, then we had indication there was going to be a traffic light system. This has come through now, Derek, and as far as I can see, it's not color-coded. Is that still happening, or is this now just everywhere is green?
No, it would appear, as far as quarantine is concerned, that it's either on or it's off, which you're right is a little bit different from how it was trailed in some of the many trails to this announcement that we've had during the course of the last week or so. I mean, I think the key thing, and maybe the unanswered question, is what's going to happen to Foreign Office advice. So I guess there is still a possibility, at least, that the Foreign Office advice will employ some sort of traffic light system in terms of how safe or otherwise a destination is considered to be. And I guess there is potentially some difference between the two lists. So I think that goes back to Paul's point about potential confusion. I mean, this has sort of been a pantomime from start to finish, hasn't it? It's like we could have been shouting, it's behind you, or oh yes it is, oh no it isn't, based on the number of announcements that they've been for the last 2 or 3 weeks. So I think, I don't know, I think maybe we've got to the interval in the pantomime and we can all pause for breath and look at the plot so far, but I don't think we're quite there yet. I think we need to wait and see what the FCO announcement is. Once we can then pull all of the information together, I think we'll have a better idea. And then, as Paul says, I do then think we then need to consider, from a consumer point of view, how do we translate that into genuine advice about where you can go to, where you'll be welcomed with open arms at the destination end, as being able to be welcomed back into the UK when you return. And there's really 3 criteria here. There's the UK quarantine, there's the destination quarantine, and there's the Foreign Office advice. And I think they're all going to come together slightly differently depending on what the destination is.
And they need to be overlaid, don't they, so that we can have a definitive list, which will help agents, of course. We've got Kelly here from Advantage. I mean, we were just saying that if you're trying to sell a holiday and you're trying to give really good, comprehensive, expert, professional advice, very difficult job to do.
Yeah, I mean, we all agree that it's a great step in the right direction. We've got a list, which we've all been striving for since the start of this. And it's great to see some of those top selling summer destinations on there. That will definitely help. However, it's incredibly complex, and probably more complex than we thought even yesterday. In terms of what we were expecting the list to look like. Yesterday, we were all planning for 3 sets of guidance, a green, an amber and a red. Today, that guidance has changed again. And of course, for us, we represent agents across the whole of the UK, and this is only at the moment applicable to those businesses that are based in England. So we're also still fighting the fight for those that aren't, and trying to get some real tangible, helpful guidance for our members that they can use when talking to customers about not only is the destination open, can they get in, but also what that experience is going to look like, both on the journey and in resort. So I think we've still got a lot to work through at the moment.
Okay. I mean, Kelly made an interesting point there, Paul, about the devolved nations. I mean, I was listening to Grant Shapps this morning saying that actually this announcement had been delayed by a couple of days. He'd held it up because he was very much hoping that Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland would come on board. He said there was still time for them to do that because obviously by July the 10th, and he felt very much like they would do. But I mean, it's confusing again, isn't it? Especially as Kelly says, you've got some businesses that have got, travel agencies in different, parts of the country.
Oh yeah, it's a communications disaster in terms of this whole process. Just to add quickly that I understand that tomorrow morning the FCO website on travel advice will list them by green and by amber. So the traffic light system will very much still be there. Of course, that has replaced the air corridors, which have replaced quarantine measures. So there's a step change every day in this policy. It's fascinating from a political point of view, but we will get those green and amber lights tomorrow, so the countries will be split. On the devolved government issue, this is very, very interesting territory, because never before have we seen different immigration requirements for England compared to Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, at least not in living memory. And what the devolved administrations are saying is that they have their own medical teams, of course, looking after public health in their own regions, and they're advising different things to what the government themselves are saying from Westminster. And indeed, the lists have changed. So during the course of this week, the Scottish government in particular have said they've seen 3 different lists over the last 72 hours. And that's sort of understandable, because countries have been going in and out based on their trajectory of cases, as cases change each day. And this is the can of worms that has been opened by creating such a system. So I think Nicola Sturgeon, especially in Scotland, is determined to make her case heard about her need to put the people first from a health point of view, which is understandable. And that has led to the delay of this list, and now the government just publishing it for England. But yeah, it's confusing. It adds to the communications nightmare for companies across the UK who have their branches in different parts of the UK. And keeping up with this is, it's like keeping up with an EastEnders plot. I mean, it's just unbelievable how it's transformed.
I'm loving the analogies you lot are giving. This is giving me gold headlines, by the way, for my story. So thank you for that, Lee. Derek, let's just perhaps get into some nitty gritty on the countries that are on. I mean, actually, to Paul's point, they've been in and out on the way up to producing this list. One assumes that this list could change again, because if infection rates rise, and I guess this list is never going to be definitive, it's going to change presumably.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be one of the operational challenges in all of this, because I think we need to be careful that the default assumption is just that this list is going to get bigger, because this list could shrink quite as easily as it's expanded. And like everybody else, I welcome the progress that we've made, but remember that 3 weeks ago, the number of countries that we had quarantine for was 0. And now we have a smaller number than we did have, but we still have a large number of countries where we still have quarantine for people coming back to the UK. So we have gone forwards, but we haven't gone forwards as far as we went backwards in the first place. We still then need to be aware of all of the countries where it's still not possible to travel without coming back into quarantine when you come to the UK. And to go back to the challenge of countries being added back into this, of course, when you book a holiday, all you can take advice from is the current list. So it could well be the case that today, tomorrow, over the weekend, you take your list into your travel agent, you book your holiday in good faith, following Foreign Office advice and current quarantine measures, and then in 4 weeks' time, when you're due to travel, there's a spike in the destination, the government changed the advice with 24 hours notice, and you suddenly can't travel to that destination. And that opens up a whole can of worms when it comes to insurance cover, when it comes to cancellation policies, airline cancellation policies, and puts us right back where we were, only now at a destination level rather than a global level. So I think, yeah, it is great news, but it's not nirvana. This is not the solution right now to all of our challenges.
Well, actually, I was going to say, Derek, I saw your tweet this morning, which I thought was very interesting. And if I could just read it, it said, "Welcome news, but let's be really clear. This isn't the end of the challenges that the travel industry faces. It's just the end of the beginning. Still a long way from the beginning of the end. And the journey to full recovery remains a long and difficult one, which not all will finish." I mean, that's realistic, but pretty sobering, isn't it? So, I mean, and I guess bringing in Kelly as well, you've got lots of members with small business who've been struggling now for a long time. And this, I don't want to be, miserable, because this, as you said, this is a good step, but it's still, it could be some pain to come still, and it's just not clear cut still.
It's not. And just to add to Derek's point about countries changing, there's also concerns about regional lockdowns in this country and whether an airport is included in any of those. So I live on the outskirts of Leicestershire, so this has never been more real than it is at the moment. I'm not in quarantine, but it could have very easily been us, and also it could have been East Midlands Airport. So then what do you do when you've got customers that are due to fly out, but also potentially customers that are already out in resort and are due to fly back? You've got a whole heap of other issues then as well. But in terms of agents, I mean, we have, fingers crossed, not lost agents at the moment. The only ones that have departed our group are the Wallace Arnold shops that formed part of the Shearings group. Other than that, we hopefully are supporting them, and they're doing well. However, there's so many more hurdles that we've got to get through. All we can do at the moment is give them as much advice and support as possible, and that's changing daily. So today, that is a 10-step checklist of things that we're advising they go through with customers that are interested in travelling in the imminent future. And also some assets to talk about destinations which are available as we stand today. But again, they could change. We could be displaying different assets on Monday to those that we're displaying today. So we've just got to keep on top of it and get as much information out to them so that they can make a decision on whether they want to sell customers for July and August departures. And if they do, give them as much information as possible to where to send them in and how to inform those customers before they travel.
I mean, I will come to you in a second, Paul, but just back to you, Derek, you were saying operationally, it's really, really difficult. And I know when we spoke before, you were saying that some of the key destinations for you weren't even thinking of opening up for some time. So now you've got the list. Does that give you confidence to sort of restart operations sooner? Or are you still quite cautious about operations?
I think for Europe, certainly. I think for some of the key European destinations, potentially for August and September departures, I think it does give us some confidence. But for our long-haul destinations, I don't think this substantially changes our position. Most of our long-haul destinations had already made the decision that they weren't really going to restart their tourism infrastructure for a point in time beyond the end of the key summer months. There may be some. Mauritius is an interesting addition to the list. Mauritius has been ready to go for quite a long time, have managed the pandemic very well and have it completely under control. So whilst we were thinking of maybe October, November for Mauritius, that could be one that we now need to go back and reconsider. So I think it might change our thinking on a few, but our view pretty much remains the same. We think there is a limited market on the balance of this year, but really we will continue to promote next year most aggressively. For the big charter summer sun guys, this is really big news, and they've been at the heart of driving to get this change made, because for them, July and August departures are critically important. For a lot of agents, those July-August departures are critically important. For a business like ours, we've pretty much created a business plan that gets us over that point anyway. And for us, this is about the long-term sustainability of the business to make sure that going forward, we can get those volumes in place for next year. And that really then comes back to consumer confidence. And I think that's driven by clarity of message. And that sort of goes back to Paul's point earlier, is what we need is really clear, concise communication to customers about where and when they can travel, because only when we get that will the confidence come back. I think there's a danger in all of this that, you know, we all think this is great news in the travel industry. It is great news in the travel industry. For most consumers, this is going to be baffling. This is going to really confuse them.
Yeah.
And that's going to do a huge amount for customer confidence.
Well, let's come to you, Paul, because as well as obviously running the Quash Quarantine campaign, you are a communications expert. I mean, I can tell you on my school WhatsApp group, people are not confident. These are people nothing to do with travel, and they are confused, asking me questions all the time, very unsure, very nervous. And that's a snapshot, I know, but these are people that would be, you know, mums that would be booking holidays. So, you know, what do you think, you know, to Derek's point about how we need this clear communication, who should do that, or how do we do that?
Well, it's a huge question. And in fact, just before I answer that, I just want to say I think it's interesting the Maldives is not on the list, which is a surprising one, bearing in mind the Seychelles is.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I don't think they've had huge discrepancies in case numbers. So an interesting one that's missing. And obviously there is a huge number of British travellers to Maldives. And in fact,
and a huge part of Derek's business.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think bookings have been going through the roof, you know, recently on that. But anyway, perhaps come back to that. The communications challenge is enormous. You're absolutely right. I think the country's split. I think there's 50% of people who are quite happy to try and carry on as normal and do their and go on a holiday, especially if they booked it earlier in the year pre-COVID. But a large part of the country not prepared to go away yet, and in fact are booking staycations, which is good for the industry, but obviously doesn't help 2020 overseas bookings. So we know the industry is going to be 30 to 40% smaller over the next year. Anyway, there is a lot of concern that there may be spikes in countries when people are away, that as Derek said, the advice changes once they book their holiday, and a lot of people are not prepared to take that risk. The confidence has to come from two areas. It's got to come from a government campaign. I honestly think that is what the government could do to help the sector, as much as pouring money into the sector. It could actually put its money into a really strong campaign to help people go overseas. I think it's unlikely, but it's something clearly we'll want to talk to the Transport Secretary about. And then secondly, the industry itself may need to come together in various forms, be it by region, by continent, by genre of travel, to pull together money to do joint advertising and campaigns. And that's already happening, I know, in some cases around the world as they prepare their plans. But it may be appropriate for the industry to come together much more than it has done in the past, unite and do some sort of joint campaigning, even if it's with a competitor. I think that's going to be important to create that confidence, which is going to be needed for 2021 at least, even if we miss out on the rest of this year.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's just come back to, we were just talking there about the omission of the Maldives, which you said was surprising. Were there any other surprising additions or omissions?
Well, personally, I'm still baffled by Portugal. I just don't understand. 3.2 million or 3.1 million British people go to Portugal every year, British travellers. It's hugely popular. There have been no deaths in the Algarve. Lisbon's had a spike, but so has Leicester. I don't understand how we as a country can turn around and say Portugal should be totally off this list.
Oh, and they were one of the first destinations to come to us saying they really wanted us, weren't they? So
yeah, it's bizarre. And I know the list is going to be reviewed on a very constant basis, although with government, constant isn't really a word that factors into their thinking. It normally takes 2 or 3 weeks to change something. So I'm really amazed. And I think Portugal will be very concerned that they've been missed off. Who knows, may consider legal action as a country. But I don't think the story's over on that yet.
Okay, and you're saying that in your experience, if we were to get changes to this list, it's not going to be quick?
No, I don't think it will be. I think the government have already said the next review will be in 28 days. That's when you'll see substantive changes. So Portugal, I don't think, will be changed before that. So you're looking at August the 1st, really, aren't you, before there's any change?
Yeah. Yeah. And then Derek, just back to Paul's point, saying he was surprised about the Maldives when the Seychelles has made the list. I mean, these are all destinations that are big for you. So were you surprised?
I tell you what, I mean, the challenge we all have now is understanding by what criteria the government have made these decisions.
Yeah.
It's all very opaque, and I don't think we're ever going to really understand what basis these decisions are being made, which I also think we're obviously really close to the Maldivian Tourism Authority. We understand the work that they've done to make their destinations safe. You look at the island resorts in the Maldives, which have been pretty much clear of COVID for weeks and weeks and weeks. Malé has had some cases, but as Paul said, no more than the Seychelles have had or Mauritius had in the early days. So you sort of look at it and think, well, we really would want to engage with our colleagues in the Maldives and the Maldivian government to help them to understand what it is that they need to do in order to get themselves onto this list. But that in itself is quite a challenge, because we don't have visibility of what exactly they need to do to get themselves onto that list. I mean, in reality, the Maldives not being on it today is not the biggest issue.
Because
most of the Maldivian hotels weren't planning to open until October, November anyway.
Yeah.
But that means we really need to be able to work now with the government to make sure that from that point, when the Maldivian resorts are ready to welcome visitors.
But Derek, it's the confidence. I think this is the problem, that by being missed off the list, anyone who has the typical consumer who has a Maldives holiday booked will be thinking, oh, I won't be able to go then. Even if it's November or December, they might be thinking, I want my money back, I'm concerned. And this is going to put further pressure on the customer call and contact centres and customer care teams in your companies and in other companies. This is the problem in creating a list like this. It sows discomfort and basically creates a lack of confidence. And I suspect we're going to be seeing, be inundated with calls this weekend from people going, is my destination not going to appear on the list then?
Yeah. Kelly, what have you done to sort of gear your members up for this weekend? I mean, Super Saturday in many ways it's being referred to, because there could well be a lot of people going, oh great, I'll go now, but as Paul says, there's going to be some concern as well. So what have you had to sort of do to prepare your members for a rash of calls either way?
Well, I think there's a huge opportunity actually for agents in this whole piece, because they are the people that can navigate consumers through some of this detail. So a lot of it has been educating them on how to sell and what to sell. So as I mentioned earlier, we've got this checklist that's a 10-point checklist, which we're suggesting members run through with customers before they confirm a booking to depart in the next couple of months. That talks them through everything from the insurance piece to what to expect on the flight, to a transfer, to what might be different in their accommodation and what they should check in resort. And then we've also put some assets together so that they can promote destinations where they don't have to quarantine on either side, so that we've got some real clear guidance on where they can sell and where perhaps it's a little bit more complex. But every case is different and every customer is different, so there's not really a blanket approach to being able to necessarily give guidance. I think it's just giving the members as much information as they can and legal understanding on what happens if things change, and that's really where we've been trying to feed the information down to the members.
Okay, and presumably though they're still dealing with refunds, and I mean that was the big talk, wasn't it, the big topic of conversation right at the start of this, but it's not gone away. And as Paul says, there might still be people now going, oh actually that's not on the list, I want my money back. So do you anticipate more of that?
Unfortunately so, and I think, you know, while there are some countries that are featured on the list, that doesn't mean that those operators are going to operate a full programme. So we'll still see consolidation on some of those routes potentially. We've already seen airlines pulling out of different departure airports. All of those things mean changes to current bookings. So that's still going on. It will continue to go on. And then for anybody that's booking now until the end of the year, again, realistically, there may be further changes. So I think, unfortunately, we're well from out of the woods in terms of working through that. But it is good to see that there are at least some destinations which we can feel more confident in selling now. Okay.
All right. Conscious of your time, guys, but I know you've all been very active in lobbying. Advantage. I know, Derek, you've all done your bit. Do you consider what you've done a success based on this list coming out? I mean, I'm not being critical. I'm just like, you know, has it been a process that you felt that you've achieved something at the end, or has it just actually been a real pain because it's taken so long?
Yeah. From our side, certainly from a quash quarantine perspective, yeah, I think it's been amazing. It's been amazing to get 500 companies to agree in the industry on one very focused issue, which was removing quarantine. Now, we haven't completely removed it, but we've removed the blanket quarantine, which is important. And it's important, I think, to have some quarantine measures there to stop cases coming in from red countries, if you like Brazil and India, America, etc. So, yeah, I think, from a lobbying point of view, with no money, we have been very successful as a group. It's not over,
which is good, because it's often levelled at the travel industry that we're not good at it. So
I wonder,
nice to be reporting on actually getting a tick in the box and getting a result.
And personally, and the group have been discussing this, I do take issue with some of the groups who do have the ear of government on a week-to-week basis. ABTA, UK Hospitality, TUI was saying the other day they've been in meetings with government. I'm afraid I think there should be a good look at the learnings from the last few weeks, because I don't think the industry bodies have necessarily done us all a favour. We should never have got into this situation. We should never have got to a point where the government even considered bringing in quarantine during June, well after it should have done in March. And I think we should be questioning how the industry operates in future, so we never get into this situation again. Thousands of jobs have gone unnecessarily in June. Lots of flights have been cancelled unnecessarily in June. The outlook for the industry is worse because of these quarantine measures that the industry group should never have allowed us to see.
I mean, Derek, you're nodding there. Do you agree with what Paul's saying?
Yeah, I think it's been a failing of the travel industry for almost as long as I've been in the travel industry, that we are notoriously bad at coming together with a single voice, when actually that's patently the right approach. Of course, people are going to have different tactics. Of course, people are going to approach things differently. And some organisations need to be more politically aware of sort of long-term relationships than others do. But I think quarantine, to just build on what Paul said, I think that this whole quarantine issue is a really interesting one, because I think the reality is that the government knew before they went into quarantine that they'd made a mistake.
Yes.
I don't think anyone in government really wholeheartedly believed 3 weeks ago that they were doing the right thing.
I think we almost thought that they weren't going to do it because they'd realised. I mean, do you remember? Like, there was 3 weeks ago, I think we thought, oh, we might have stopped it ever happening, but
it was only Dominic Cummings that wanted it. It's the Dominic Cummings policy. That's where it came from, and he wanted it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of politics behind that. And I think had that sort of had that voice been stronger sooner, I do think we could have stopped this position from even becoming an issue in the first place. And credit to Paul and the guys over at Red Savannah. I mean, I do think that very quickly we created an effective lobby group, and our voice was heard. And I've played a small part and done a few radio interviews and tweeted as I do. But really, it's the coordinated efforts of Paul and the letter writing and the lobbying that I do think has resulted in a quicker U-turn on this, and probably a more significant U-turn in terms of the number of countries that we're now talking about than would ever have been the case if we hadn't got involved. So Paul's absolutely right. There is a lesson in that, and I think we need to build on the relationships that we've made during this process and take that forward into whatever comes next. And a final point from me, I know we're running short of time. I've always been relatively cautious about all of this, and my tweet that you read out sort of painted a picture, because the one thing that we really still are not lobbying hard enough on is sector support for the travel industry to continue to see us through this crisis beyond the end of the furlough scheme. And I think the furlough scheme as a generic scheme has been hugely helpful, but it ends at the end of October. And our problems don't end at the end of October. As Paul has said, revenues next year are going to be significantly down on this year. Our forward revenues don't land until much later in the cycle. Hibernation for the travel industry is going to continue way beyond the end of furlough. And my real concern is that if there isn't further support, that there will be further failures and people's jobs will be lost. So yeah, I think we need to sort of build on this momentum now and maintain that voice and continue to campaign for support.
And sorry, Derek, I accept what you're saying, and I agree with you. But should that be Paul and his team, that since they've got the ear now and they have been effective, or are you saying it should be someone else that continues now that the quarantine thing has been largely achieved, but is sector support, is that a job of somebody else, or should Paul continue?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure the quarantine battle is won.
No, sorry.
The quarantine was not won. The quarantine
not one, but you know, but
engagement is over. So I think there's still a job to be done on that. But now it's more an observation to build on Paul's point that actually, you know, even today there is another major issue, which I think most people in the travel industry acknowledge is an issue that needs addressing, and yet nobody has really picked up, you know, the baton and really addressed it with the government. And I think what we should do, regardless of who does it, is we should take heart from the fact that when we do get it right, the government do listen, and when we've got a strong message and we tell it well, that we can make the government rethink. And right now, I don't think that the government are seriously thinking about providing additional sector support for the travel industry.
Beyond October, which, as you say, is going to, I mean, September ATOL renewals and then the end of furlough. I mean, that could be a very, very difficult time for travel, couldn't it, Paul?
Yes, absolutely. And I know the Chancellor is going to be making a statement in a few days about further support. So he's pulled a rabbit out of the hat with the furlough scheme. Maybe he'll have something up his sleeve as the magician in this crisis that will help all sectors. But Derek's right that this is a crisis we could never have planned for. Sadly, lots of colleagues have had to be laid off with a lot of them with huge amounts of experience, and they're going to find it hard to get work for a long time. Something's got to support and prop up the industry because of the million jobs that are at risk still.
Okay. All right. Well, that's probably a good place to end it on. Great to have you all on so swiftly, and thank you very much for doing that, because you just had a few minutes really to digest the news about the list today. But thank you for your time, and we wish you the best of luck going through that list and overlaying the FCO advice, and we hope that it does achieve some more sales for you. So thank you very much to Kelly from Advantage Travel Partnership, to Derek from Kuoni, and Dare Touristique, and to Paul from the PC Agency and Quash Quarantine. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.